I drove in on the first day of the war, and I drove in a rental car. And my loving bosses at the New York Times, they were embedding all these reporters with the military, but the Pentagon had never done that before, and we'd never done it. So they said, we want you to just go in on your own, and how do I want to do that? And so I flew to Kuwait City and I rented a car, a Hertz rental car. And the guy was, you're not going to go up to them. I was like, no. And so I drove all the way to Baghdad in a rented Yukon, and it was insane. But I remember the first day that we drove in, and I'd been in Afghanistan, and Afghanistan was an amazing, we rolled into these towns with the Northern Alliance, and people would cheer, and the guys were throwing the turbans off, and the women were taking their burqas off, and it was wonderful, joyous, incredible time to be alive. And I remember as we rolled into this town, which was called Safwan, which was right on the border, I was kind of expecting that. I've done this before, and when we got there, I remember people weren't cheering. They were kind of standing in lines, and their mouths were hanging open, and they were kind of looking at us in a kind of dumbfounded way. And some people were cheering, some people were crying. Most people were just staring at us with their mouths hanging open. I remember I got out of the car, and this elderly woman ran up to me. Her name was Tasra Naji or something, I think. And she threw her arms around me and she said, oh, thank you. You've gotten rid of that terrible tyrant. Thank you. And she was crying and she was laughing. And then she kind of looked up at me and she said, I'm coming back. Do I need to be afraid? And I stayed with her for a bit, and then she started to cry and she said, well, my son, they took my son away. 7 years ago, I've never seen my son. Please help me find my son. And so she was laughing and she was crying. And I stayed with her for a bit, and then I walked a little more down the street. And by this time, as this happens anywhere in the third world, and somebody like me, I look like a CIA agent, I have a big crowd of people around me, a huge crowd of Iraqis who are now following me. Another guy walked up to me, and he said, the moment you leave here, the moment the Americans leave this town, the Mukhabarat's going to come back in here and they're going to start killing people. And that's what happened in 1991, and it's going to happen again. You've got to save me. Please save me. And the Americans at this point were rolling through the town, the kids are coming in and tearing down the Saddam posters. And I said, hold on a minute, what do you mean? Who's Mukhabarat? And he pointed across, he just pointed across the courtyard and said, that guy right there is Mukhabarat. So I said, let's go talk to him. So we walked over, a big crowd behind me, and we walked up to the guy, and I said, so this guy here says that you're secret police. And the guy looked at me, and he was very well dressed, he had a tie. And he looked at me and he kind of looked me up and down, and then he said, Inshallah, which means God willing. Inshallah, the Mukhabarat will return. And then he turned around and he walked away. And I remember the crowd behind me kind of laughed, gave a very nervous laugh. And I wasn't sure who they were laughing for, but, and the whole war was there that day. It was this, people had already started looting. The Americans took off and went to Baghdad. It was this incredibly broken, traumatized, atomized place. It was like we pried the doors off the mental institution, and we were suddenly this was ours. And I thought about that a lot because that was the first day, a long time ago.